All right. Hey, Trip. First of all, it's a great honor to have you back at Arctic15 since your 2014 visit. Obviously, we had a plan that you would come to Finland, but let's hope that next summer we can make that happen. Yeah.
That
But
would be
never.
fine. It's great to see you, and I'm glad to be here. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us here today, even in a virtual form. And let's get straight up in it. So your career is very impressive. Before we jump into my questions about entrepreneurship, gaming industry, Steve Jobs, growth, success, failure, and your current coaching activities, maybe you could give us a little brief introduction on yourself and career on your own words.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you. Well, I'm sure, like many of you in the audience, I discovered as a kid that I was just way more mentally active when I was at play, and kind of stumbled onto fundamental principles about who we are as a species, and what turns us on, and what's really stimulating. And that this was back during the golden age of television. So I was able to notice that when I was just sitting there on the sofa watching the television, and I was more alive when I was actually playing, particularly if I was playing games. And I was drawn to games that had simulation elements where you could use real strategy and do something kind of for an adult, and fell in love with, in particular, sports that team sports where you could do that, and it just became a dream even as a teenager to make games like that. And I actually had my first exposure to a computer. It was a very expensive hobby kit that one of my dad's friends had bought. He was this guy that my dad knew was a technical genius. He ended up he actually worked as the lead designer for one of the early arcade game companies, a company called Gremlin that was acquired by Sega. And he invented a game called Blockade that basically became the basis for the game Snake. And many of us remember having a Nokia phone with Snake embedded on it.
Yes.
So this guy was really, really talented, but he had this incredible machine that had all these flashing lights and switches on it, no display. And he had it hooked up to a very primitive printing device called a KSR-33 that had a roll of yellow paper that would spit out, and it would pound, one at a time, characters on it. And he had created a game. And even though it was a super primitive thing, that's when I realized this is the future. And I had noticed when I was playing the kind of games I liked playing before the computer, they were more like D&D. They were a lot of work. I mean, you had a lot of data to keep track of. You had to administrate all this stuff. And to me, it was a problem that television was so effortless, and that I wanted to do that. I thought, well, what we have to do is take all this stuff that we do in games like D&D, all of the data, the table lookups, the rules, the dice rolls, just all of that stuff, and put it inside a computer and have pretty pictures on the screen like television, and then we'll have a really big deal. So I feel like I've been working this has been like a 50-year journey, and that included about a decade before I founded Electronic Arts, where I was very consciously planning to start Electronic Arts, and even pegged the year I would do it 7 years before I did it. And then of course that was quite an adventure. Before Electronic Arts, I realized that it'd be a good idea to go work for somebody else for a while, helping get computers into homes and learning how to run a business. And the company I picked was this little tiny company in Cupertino. We had 12 office workers at the time. We were making about 150 hobby computers on an assembly line in the back, tiny little business. And on my second day there, the founders asked me to figure out a way we can sell these to businesses. It was a hobby business. And I was the person at the company working with the founders that kind of figured out how to go after the desktop office market. I brought the first spreadsheet software into Apple. I hired a guy and had him bring in, through some connections, the first mouse that came into Apple. And as they say, the rest is history. but I'm obviously first and foremost a game guy. So then you get to Electronic Arts. I ran that company for its first decade. And I feel like the last 20, 25 years, I've been really focused on the internet and mobile and I feel like we're starting kind of a renaissance period for the game industry now that it's become a really mainstream activity and it's become a whole new type of social platform. It's a very exciting time in the industry.
Okay, cool. That's an amazing career. So maybe let's start with the entrepreneurship, right? It's in your blood. You love to create new things, and it's not only evident from your various ventures, but also how you created the, for example, world's first college degree in video games. And like, if you go back to that moment in your life, like where did you see the future intersection of like the strategy and the game theory, and like how do you see it today?
Yeah, game theory was a really fascinating topic that I discovered in college, and my professor later became one of my thesis advisors, and then many decades later, he became the first to win a Nobel Prize in game theory. So he kind of lit up my world and got me thinking about the power of that kind of set of tools that have to do with strategy. And it's funny, but a lot of people don't realize this, but the word strategy, it comes from a Latin word stratagem. And in Latin, stratagem means the maneuvers of a general. So pretty much everything about strategy, it comes from a military reference point. And I could tell even when I was a kid that I was already kind of wired to think that way. And this is, I'll just say two things that I've found to be really useful in life. One of them is you've got to get to know yourself really well. You've got to peel off all the different layers of your identity and get down to at your core, who are you really? Mm-hmm. And if you activate those abilities, if you activate and lean into the things that you really love doing and that you never get tired of doing, and you are able with your free will to notice an opportunity where all of your abilities and passions get you on the right compass heading towards something that could really be successful, then it allows you to lean into a long period of time where you're going to work really hard on it. You're going to make the effort. And all those times that you think about quitting, you'll keep going because you know your heart's in the right place. You know that you're doing something that really makes sense. You'll know that you're doing something that you're capable of doing. And it's kind of amazing when I look back on it, because even as a kid, people would try to tell me not to do what I wanted to do. And I would just kind of laugh. You know, my mother actually said to me when I was assembling my first game as a teenager, she said, "Oh, I always hoped you would do something more socially redeeming." And it didn't even really hurt to ever say that, because of course she said that. I mean, I kind of knew her level of understanding. I knew the culture that she was coming from. She loved to read books. Yeah. For what it's worth, to this day, like my mother, books are still my favorite medium. I read hundreds of books every year. Wow. I'm a prolific reader. So I don't disagree with her about books. I just knew that I was onto something new that she didn't understand, and ultimately it would prove to be socially redeeming. And if you don't have that feeling yourself about your convictions and who you are and what you're doing, yeah, you'll run into a lot of problems. You know, and one of the ways that many of us have perhaps seen this, if you were in college once and you had a friend who was pre-med who wanted to become a doctor, and then they had to take this course called organic chemistry, and that course just crushes a lot of people, and it makes them look in the mirror and ask themselves, do I really want to be a doctor? And whose idea was that I be a doctor? Yeah. And if you're doing things because your parents want you to do them, if you're still on that path, then like a lot of us, you'll find out as you get older, probably in your 40s, you'll have some kind of midlife crisis because you're just not lined up with your real identity, and you're not maybe mindful of strengths and weaknesses and your blind spots. And one irony there is that it will turn out to be true that your biggest strength is your biggest weakness, because you will become so dependent on it, so convinced that you are invincible at that thing, that you're not perfect and that it's not always going to work out. And I had the pain and suffering later in my career from many things that went wrong, I think, that are related to that. again, that's the kind of thing that I would hope to help people understand at an earlier age. I'd like to suggest to people that if you can accelerate your midlife crisis and start having it right now, you're better off than if you have to wait several more years to have the unpleasant surprises that many of us get.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you about like what's is there something for the younger people to take away from your experience and when they're taking their future on their own hands, basically. So I think you almost answered that there already.
Yeah, and of course, I think another thing to know when you're young is go try to meet lots of people. You have to be really a hustler and meet people and ask them questions and learn from people and try to figure out who is willing to give you some of their time to share their experience and their expertise and let them be a sounding board for your ideas, and maybe they can help you make some other network connections and keep that process going. But there's so much to learn. It's so essential to be a lifelong learner. And that's one thing I got to know about myself, is that I'm absolutely incredibly curious all the time. It's almost like there's no subject in the history of the universe that I'm not interested in learning more about. And yeah, if you have that kind of fascination about what's possible and what you can become, then you'll go.
Excellent. So what gets you up in the morning? Like, is there something like a specific purpose in your life today? As an entrepreneur, what keeps you going today?
Well, I'm at a point where I really clearly that the thing that matters the most to me, that I enjoy the most, is helping other people. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that at more scale. So I'm working on a book. I'm interested in doing more public speaking, you know, where I'm able to appeal to larger audiences. And I've started doing social media just in the last year. So I'm, you know, building up a follower base and, you know, using it as a platform. Like this summer, I came out in favor of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I had some recommendations for people that would help them learn more about what's really going on and the social changes that need to happen in America. Yeah. I also recently came out very clearly on my platform in support of Joe Biden and the necessity to vote Trump out of office. And, you know, when you are a game industry personality and you've got some followers in social media that love you because of 3DO or EA or whatever, they may not always agree with your political views or your social views. I feel like it's part of my responsibility to stand up and be counted. This is a very critical time in human history and in American history, and we need to make some changes.
For sure. And then you look at the, like, of course, everyone have their limiting beliefs as an entrepreneur. What can I do? What can I not do? What I'm good at? Do you have some kind of a go-to method, or like how do you overcome these limits that maybe it's a society or your buddies, whoever put these limits on? So how do you beat those, your own limits?
Well, if you're part of a startup, there needs to be a clear leader. And leadership is one of those things that is hard to teach to people. And some of us have some kind of inborn capacity for it. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this repeat over and over again. There's certain personality traits, certain aptitudes, and it's just kind of a baseline that gives an organization more potential if there is a good leader. Somebody's got to be in charge. You don't always have these leadership characteristics, but one thing that everybody can do is learn some skills around that. And of course, you need to have a team. There isn't any one person that can do the whole thing, and the team members need to complement each other. Sometimes it's a problem if the leader is too insecure and afraid of hiring people that are more experienced, afraid of hiring people that are smarter than them, afraid of hiring people that know more about something than they do. But in fact, you have to do all of those things. Yeah. You have to believe enough that you belong in that leadership position that you're in, and to be more fearless, more courageous about hiring people that are best possible people that you can get, that can complement you, that absolutely know how to do things that you don't want to do or that you're not good at doing. And hopefully the personalities all help kind of cover each other's backside so that you're less exposed. And then you have to be a really good listener and be willing to hear what all of those people in the room and all of their brain cells have that might be able to contribute, and not get, again, insecure if they're not all agreeing with you and get argumentative. That's really not going to turn out to be that productive. Better to be a good listener. And, I used to, when I was younger, I would people because I wasn't comfortable enough just realizing that I had the position power. There's a thing called position power. What's your job? And if they report to you and you're at the top of the chain of command, if they don't agree with you and you want to choose a strategy that you can't get everybody to agree on, that's your job. It's your job to be decisive and to resolve disagreements by making a decision. And you can't always get everybody to agree on everything. That would be crazy. The only way a group is going to always agree on everything is never do anything very interesting. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably doing something new. It's probably never been done before. Therefore, nobody knows how to do it, whether they're experienced at something else or not. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. There's going to be disagreements. And if you find yourself in that meeting feeling like you have to win people or convince them, and you're taking that too far, it's just better to step back and say, I'm going to listen. And after you've done that for a while, and you've made sure that you call out the quieter people in the room that are too shy or too scared, that don't feel safe about really telling you what you need to hear, you need to try to draw them out. And then maybe prepare to end the meeting by saying, I think I've heard from everyone. Anybody have anything else they want to add? And then you announce that I appreciate all the input. I'm going to make a decision tomorrow morning. Between now and tomorrow morning, if you have more information for me, get it to me. Call me, text me, message me, email me. I'm going to sleep on it tonight. I'm going to be reflecting, thinking about this conversation. We need to move forward. It's time for us to make a decision. And I need the commitment from everyone on the team that we together will execute on whatever that decision is. And then you end the meeting. I didn't know how to do that when I was younger. I do now. I try to now help people by teaching them how to do these things. And you can learn these things. The other thing that you can learn is to have a commitment to planning. A lot of entrepreneurs are very creative, but they don't really do good planning. And if you are doing good planning, then you're going to be able to study the environment, and you're going to be able to keep track of competition, keep track of technology trends and how that's evolving, knowing where there's opportunities, knowing what you have to worry about competitively, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, this thing called SWOT, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then analyzing that environment and figuring out, okay, what's the strategy? And then once you've got the strategies figured out, now you've got a way to present to all of your team, every team member, a vision, a mission that hopefully you can break down and explain to them with a good story, and have them go, wow, that makes sense. That's going to work. Let's do that. And then you go into the planning details, the budgets, the ring, the type of stuff that you do to go make it happen, and you bake it into an annual business plan, and you do that every year. So that's a very important thing that everybody's better at doing.
Yeah. So of course you've been mentoring already many entrepreneurs over your career. Is there some kind of like Achilles heel for an entrepreneur? Like, what's the most biggest mistake that you've seen other entrepreneurs and perhaps yourself also doing in the past or present?
I think it's always the same thing. I'll just call it hubris. Again, there's a fairy tale about Icarus. They could escape from the island they were on by making these wings made out of wax. His son goes up too high, melt, but it's just giddy, and he goes up too high, and of course he ends up crashing to his death. The the way that plays out in business uh, reminds me of the great Grand Prix auto racers, Niki Lauda and Ayrton Senna. One of them died, and one of them got scarred for life from accidents they had for the result of their own ego getting the best of them. Mm-hmm. And as they're obviously highly competitive, they're really great at what they do. And they feel like a job to push a car to the very, very edge of the laws of physics before they turned it into an airplane. And unfortunately, in both cases, they went to their fellow drivers and said, it's not safe to race because of pain. Drivers said, you really don't want to race because of this or that or the other. And that activated the ego and their competitive side and said, oh yeah, okay, I'm just there and beat you. And then their cars too far on tracks that they actually had set up front that were not safe, and they crashed. Yeah. So we do that. Again, this is what I said earlier about our strength becoming our biggest weakness. And we have to be able to reflect ourselves, but also check in with other people and bounce things off of them before we make the critical decisions.
Okay, and then let's talk about like a success. Today, like we're entering different phases in our lives and more professional, personal experiences. So maybe the definition of success also changes. What's your currently like a perception of your internal success, and has it changed for you? Is it like your purpose? Is it aligned with your past and present success?
Well, the weird thing when I was a kid is that I had this inner knowing that I had the capacity to do what I wanted to do in my work. Mm-hmm. And I think I was protected in that belief because I thought, well, this is new. Nobody else knows more about it than me. Why not me? And that proved to be true. Meanwhile, in my personal life, and I'm talking about the kinds of feelings that we have, the way we manage our emotions, the social life we have, the relationships that we have, the family life we have. I clearly had a lack of talent, lack of innate ability. You know, for example, I'm an introvert, I'm shy, I'm insecure. I'm certainly not as insecure today as I was when I was young, but I was very cautious. I was very bold on my work, and then I was very cautious at everything else. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of those things, understand enough about your personality to realize that, yeah, you're not going to just do everything equally easily. Nobody's wired that way. We're not all good at everything. We're all good at some things and not others. Yeah. And I was often, I think when I was younger, I could have been happier, and I could have been more sensible about decisions in life, the way I was in my life. And when I worked for 4 years with Steve, I got to see what it looks like when someone is in fact angry underneath. And back in the 70s, people would come in and meet the company, and they'd meet me and they'd meet him. And they would have a problem with Steve, and they would come to me later and say, what is the deal with that guy? And I would say to them, in the 70s, before we'd had a lot of success, I would say to them, well, he was given up for adoption at birth. He's really mad at his biological parents. He feels betrayed, and he wants to get even with them. He wants to become so famous that he stands up above the rest of humanity through his achievements, that his biological parents will realize that's our baby and feel their shame. I would tell people that in the 1970s, and amazingly enough, that is exactly what he did. And wow. he was able to learn where his parents were. He chose to reconcile with his mother, but he was fiercely determined to not reconcile with his father, which I think is a bit bizarre. Mm-hmm. His father was a Syrian man from a very wealthy, very well-educated family that at times in their family history had controlled the price of wheat in Arabia. And they owned oil refineries, very successful businesses. So if you want to know genetically where did Steve get some of his business capacities, from his father's line. And yet he knew where this guy was the last 15 years of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve died angry. You know, he was still blowing people up. You know, people, even towards the end, after he knew he was terminal with cancer, were afraid to get on elevators with him because they thought they could lose their job between floors. You know, that Steve would ask them a question, he wouldn't like the answer, and boom, the next day they're gone.
Wow.
So that's a lot of anger to hold on to. And, you know, we all have issues that we're grappling with that we healed and fully resolved. And, you know, working on your heart and figuring out how to heal yourself, it's one of the most important projects you're going to have in your life.
Mhm. Yeah, so during your stint at Apple Computers, was there like something that really surprised you about that specific experience working there with Steve and the other Steve and everybody else?
I think at Apple, that's where I first had concrete evidence industries get complacent and companies that are market leaders start to get a little bit lazy and they get overconfident about their position. And of course, technology is always like the rug is always getting pulled out. You know, something new invented in the next 10 minutes, it's going to change everything, and it's going to happen faster than people can imagine. And we were part of those changes. And of course, ironically, Apple ran into problems. I mean, you know, a decade later, Steve gets kicked out, and our CEO had gotten fired after the IPO because he really couldn't take all the pressures of running a public company. And the leadership of the company, as it went into the late 1980s and early 90s, things just got worse. The market share of the company kept going down. And by the late 1990s, a lot of people thought it was going to fail.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to believe when you look back on it.
Mhm.
And ironically, Steve had spent a decade kind of wandering in the wilderness. And when he came back to Apple, he was a different guy. He'd learned a lot from being involved with Pixar. And he stepped up and became arguably the best CEO in history, because he not only was able to take this company a lot of people thought would fail,
Yeah.
it into the most valuable company in the world, but in his spare time, he built Pixar into a giant success as the chairman and owner of that company. To have two big successes like that you're working at the same time, I can't think of anybody that's done anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. And then of course, you had constantly had to challenge him on his ways of doing and then maybe mediating there. But do you think that your ability to speak up of what you believed in despite of maybe being a little bit unpopular opinion among their, did it help you to start and grow Electronic Arts then?
Well, you know, I think you've got to be willing to do what you believe is right and what is worth doing. And again, that requires courage, risk-taking, determination, resilience. You're going to get knocked down. You got to be willing to keep back up. I think the thing that I only learned later is this concept that you don't have to be angry. You don't have to be a miserable time. You know, if you're doing something worthwhile in your work, you can have contentment and peacefulness and satisfaction and happiness in your life as a whole. Not mutually exclusive. I think when we've seen of angry CEOs, you know, and the Steve Jobs archetype has now been, you know, mimicked on TV shows, et cetera. It's had success that unfortunately a lot of people are trained into the bad habit of thinking, oh, that's how you do it. And, you know, Silicon Valley is a famously dysfunctional for the relations between, you know, the owner. Yeah, it just doesn't have to be that way. I think the next generation, and I see a lot of opportunities for young people to lead changes around the world that will make the world function better, because it'll take advantage of our diversity. It will you know, be more socially engaging, everybody to be able to contribute the way they can, and you know, we have a lot of opportunity going forward.
So before we move forward to electronic arts, quickly, is there something about Steve Jobs perhaps you have not shared publicly you could share with us now?
Well, some of you might be familiar with the folk singer. She was kind of like Bob Dylan, but the female. Her name is Joan Baez.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a time when Steve and I were very young when we started working together. He was 23, I was 24, and I think a year or two later, I was dating a woman that was older than me. And Steve pulled me into his office one time and started asking me questions about what it's like dating an older woman. And we started talking about it, and then he revealed dating Joan Baez.
Okay.
So I had lots of moments like that with Steve. You know, he and I were very close. He always treated me well. He respected me, so he didn't try to tear me to shreds ever. I think he knew that, yeah, that wasn't going to work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on from that. And then how did you know, of course you prepared, how did you know that leaving Apple to form Electronic Arts was the right decision for you at that moment in time?
My whole life, and I'd been specifically working on it for about 11 years. My last couple of years at Apple, I was waiting for what I thought I needed to have as a big idea. I kept saying to myself, I can start a company, I can be a competent, thinker and leader, but the company has to have some kind of secret sauce. It's got to have something that it really does better than anybody else. What's that going to be? What's that big idea? Since then, I've heard people refer to this as a hedgehog concept, and it goes way back to, I think, some Greek philosopher that pointed out that a fox is big and smart and has long teeth, but the hedgehog has only one thing for it, but that's all it needs, and which is the ability to curl up into a ball with spiky fur. And if you're a hedgehog, you can be going your business and a fox shows up and you just curl up and the fox tries to eat you but can't seem to do it and eventually gives up and leaves, and you go about your way. So that's become known as the hedgehog concept, which is, what is it your business does better than anybody in the world? And that was the critical idea that came to me maybe a year or two before I started EA, that I thought, okay, that's it. That's the idea that I was looking for. That's the linchpin of this company around. And it was the idea that software, it would be a new medium, that it would be a fundamental new form of communication and engagement. And therefore, it was an art form. And therefore, the best were going to be artists. And I had to build the right company that knew exactly how to take care of, nurture, refine, design, and produce their games, and then get them out to the world, so that the world would know about these artists. And that was something nobody else had ever done before. And I thought, yeah, that a company can be built around that idea.
Okay, pretty cool. Okay, then we can move to discuss a little about growth, success, failure, all part of human life. You grew multiple companies up to the IPO stage, and then while your number of employees increased, like, how did you maintain positive and thriving culture within your companies? Like, is there some advice for leaders who are trying to navigate the similar type of energetic culture in their companies, and now in this current COVID digital environment also on top of that? So
Yeah, it's interesting because right now there are some game companies, Unity, Skills, going public. Other companies are going public, like cloud services companies. And I went through 3 IPOs in my career, and I can tell you that it's much harder running a company once it's public. And there's all this pressure because every quarter you've got to say how you did financially, and the markets are going to punish you if you're off by a penny. And it causes a lot of tunnel vision and short-term thinking in public companies. And then there's also the distraction, because if you do what I like to do, I like to have every one of my employees in the world have stock options. I want to have a one society where we're all owners of the company. It's a egalitarian West approach. And by the way, it doesn't mean that they all have the same amount. I'm not talking about socialism. I'm talking about a merit system, meritocracy, where if you have more in advance, faster, et cetera.
Yeah.
So what happens when a company goes public is that for many employees, it's the first time they have a tangible understanding of their stock, and they get preoccupied with it. And that's always going to happen. And then the management team gets a little too worried about what the results are going to be, which means you're too focused on the existing business that's generating revenue, when your best thinkers need looking out front of that and figure out what's next. You know, what are the things that we can invent that haven't been done yet that are going to be the next wave of growth, that are going to be the things that disrupt ourselves in the industry, that allow us to still be the leader in 5 or 10 years. And in the game industry, it's interesting because we have these legacy companies. These include Sony, Nintendo, Electronic Arts, Activision, Take-Two. These are all companies that are still, in my opinion, too focused on the past. They're still, they're putting their best people still on the old business models, the old product models, the old channels of distribution. And they've generally been resistant to changes in the industry. So you look at the idea of digitally downloading a game, which was pioneered by Valve with the Steam service on the PC. They shopped that around with all the other game publishers when they started it, and everybody told them to get lost. And so they had to do it themselves. And of course, games are on it because it's a viable channel and they have to be on it. But there's a bunch of these new trends now. I mean, you think about esports, augmented reality, subscription services, cloud streaming of games, the games that are attached to a virtual goods economy. You know, there's just all of this stuff that is happening and changing really fast. And you keep seeing new companies, notably in Asia. You know, there's been, I mean, I don't want to discount Europe, because I think mainly what I'm trying to say here is there's more of it happening outside of the United States. So there's more of this kind of legacy thinking in the United States. And, you know, the reality is that there are creative people everywhere in the world that are willing to be pioneers, and they're pushing on these new boundaries. And some of them have made games that have, you know, mobile games that have done over $1 billion in revenue. In fact, it's never been easier to get new intellectual property invented that can be commercially successful. That's very exciting.
Yes, so there's been a lot of success, but also some failures are part of life, like your personal or venture in the 3D or the console world. But how did you not let that to discourage you and keep going as an entrepreneur to innovate more?
You know, I think at the end of the day, all of us, we're going to have our wins and our losses. I had them in an unusual order. I think a lot of people screw up a bunch and then they have success. I think the important thing that I had to make peace with at the end of it all is that I'm the same person that did both of these things, all of these things. And I was always motivated by the same values and the same goals. And all of them were worthwhile from that standpoint. So if you look at 3DO, I really always believed that it was my job to enable the nerds to take over the world. You know, all of my developers were all nerds. You know, the Economist magazine, they did a story about me once where they had an illustration of me looking kind of goofy and wearing a crown, and the headline on the story was "The King of the Nerds." And yes, I'm happy to say I'm the king of the nerds. And so my interests have always been to enable all of these software developers that are like me, and to help them bring their product to the public in the biggest and most open and most successful way. And you don't want to have some giant reptilian monopoly sitting in the middle of that's sucking 30% of your revenue out just because they have created a walled garden and they think it's okay to play Monopoly. So, again, 3 was an attempt to say, hey, why not have, instead of a Nintendo style model, which is very much what Apple and Android do today, instead of that, why not have a platform that's more like audio cassette or television or DVD, where the platform is basically enabling everything. And now you get a much greater variety of content, and you have lower prices, and you're serving the public in a much better way and offering all kinds of different services for different needs. And unfortunately, a 30% tax in the middle of all of that, it pretty much kills off a whole lot of possible things and puts people in the chase to compete with each other around the handful of ideas that have proven to work. And that's just it's a sadly narrow situation. So I don't try to do a 3DO. I look back on it and I realize, okay, yeah, that was probably too ambitious. And I didn't know when I started it that Sony was going to spend $2 billion to launch the PlayStation. And yeah, I had big partners that weren't willing to make that kind of commitment. And okay, I don't look back on it and think it wasn't worthwhile to try. And I learned some valuable lessons and managed to still turn that company into a game software company that reached $100 million in revenue. But that's one of the things you do in business is you make pivots, and the environment changes, and sometimes you don't always make all the right moves at all the right times. And a specific corporation can run out of money and have itself painted into a corner. And you just have to continue to want to be in the game, trying to make things happen. And of course, I feel like I've always been out on the bleeding edge, trying to innovate.
Yeah.
I was calling the mobile phone, this is like back in 2003, way before Facebook was invented, way before smartphones. In 2003, I started calling the mobile phone the social computer, and it absolutely has become that. And of course, I was a big believer in social games even back in the 1980s, and they're all the rage now. I was always inclined to make games that were so it's, again, a lot of these ideas that I felt like I had where I was ahead of my time, I can't be too tough on myself for, okay, it made sense to me. I thought it would make sense to a lot of people this year, but it turns out it makes sense to everybody until 5 or 10 years. Be cheaper. Okay, I can understand.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of like, how do you then identify where's the growth opportunities coming? What's the biggest disruption happening? Do you have some kind of a process for market discovery, or how do you go about finding the next big idea?
I have a good network of people that I stay in touch with, and often they help me notice something. And then of course, once you've noticed it, you can start doing some research and talking to more people about it and figure out what it all means. And, for example, there are themes like virtual reality where I'm more of a skeptic. I think it's likely that VR will initially have more success in vertical markets that are maybe in business or science or medicine or in sports. And it just like it's what everybody really would do right now in the current state that it's in. And obviously, I think the cloud is everything. We're steadily moving towards doing things because they're more convenient, and the cloud is the ultimate inconvenience. Yeah. Of course, right now with the pandemic, there are too many Zoom calls going on. So, everybody at home is either at school on a Zoom call, or they're working in a Zoom call, and the infrastructure can't quite handle it. It's a little tricky. So we'll at some point get more back to normal, and we'll go about our business.
Okay, obviously you have a little special relationship with Finland, where I'm based. And when you were running your second gaming company or design agent, Digital Chocolate, back in 2004, you acquired this small Finnish game development studio called Sumea, which back then was led by Ilkka Paananen, who of course later on founded Supercell. Is there any more details you can tell about us about this story? Anything that you remember about making the acquisition deal and so on, and like how was it working with Finns and Nordic people overall?
I love Finland, and it's been a real joy, a real pleasure to have the opportunity to be there, get to know the people, have customers, conduct business there, and what a great culture, what a great group of people, and look, I've done business all over the world. I have had operations on the ground in 20 countries on 4 continents. So I've been all over the place and have had responsibilities all over the place. Finland's for sure one of my most favorite ever places to work. And the things that I noticed about the Finnish people is that they're plenty creative. So there are plenty of artistic oriented, creative people there, but it's a very disciplined society. And of course, I found myself thinking, yeah, well, they've been battling since the Ice Age to survive up here, and yeah, you'd better get disciplined. And one of the I felt was the people we had at Digital Chocolate in Finland, they were absolutely fabulous at process, at figuring out methods and procedures and structure in the organization and how it conducted the work that were exceptionally well designed and really effective. Guys that went on to have so much success with Supercell, they were on a learning curve, and maybe they worked with Digital Chocolate for as many as 7 years. And we were, towards the end of that period, we were really struggling to understand how to make free-to-play games that monetize. And we figured out a whole lot of parts of that form. We failed to really capture a way to get enough spending to happen for the game to make any money. You have to have enough lifetime value customer that you can afford the cost of advertising and spin things up. And that was really the thing that Digital Chocolate quite cracked the code on. And neither did the guys in Finland. And of course, when they went over to Supercell, they initially discovered some of the same problems with their first game ideas and tests. And I think and really shaking down the best practices of how to build those kinds of games. Again, there was just obviously Supercell had a commitment to that, and they understood the journey they were on and the work they needed to do, and they just had the patience and determination to add it until they refined and improved that understanding. And then suddenly, Heyday comes out and it does well enough, and then Clash of Clans comes out and kaboom, and they're really one of the few the world that's had multiple billion-dollar mobile games. So they're pretty special in those ways, and they're very special guys, no question. Ilkka's certainly one of the most favorite people I've ever enjoyed working with. There's quite a few really special people there. I think Finland's a fantastic country to do business in, and I love the way the government gets involved in technologies and education, and there's a bright future for a Silicon Valley type industry to just keep growing and getting bigger in Finland. So it's a very precious set of memories for me, all of my time and experience in Finland, and that's why I'd certainly love to come back again. And looking forward to all of this stuff calming down, where we can all start seeing each other.
Yes, absolutely. And then let's talk a little bit about social. Like, today, technology, the integration of integrity is a hot topic these days. Like, what's your take on like a sense of responsibility from tech companies to having the regards to privacy of consumers and keeping their best interest in heart?
Yes, I would recommend to everyone that's listening right now that you watch these 2 movies. I've seen both of them on Netflix, so I know that's one of they're available. The first one is called The Great Hack, and it gets into Cambridge Analytica and a lot of the manipulation around elections going back as much as 6-7 years in a variety of countries. It's pretty shocking stuff. Even if you think you know what I'm talking about, still see the movies. It'll take your understanding further. A new movie came out just a few weeks ago called The Social Dilemma. And it gets right at these core issues and we really do now have issues with addiction. We need to have clear boundaries. We need to understand that we're being manipulated. We're really not that much different than a pigeon in a test pecking a white disc trying to get. That's how slot machines are designed. It's pretty much proven by science. We know what they're doing to us. So it really is unfortunate that there's a dimension of all of this stuff that's kind of like the Matrix. And we've got to learn to separate who we are as people from the technologies and media that we use, and make sure that we don't lose ourselves in there and just become part of that machine.
Mm-hmm. And then when, of course, combining social impact and gaming, and of course the gaming industry has been very crucial and interesting pivot in the world of impact and sustainability also. So, and then one of your recent ventures, If You Can company, did amazing work on the field of the educational and emotional growth by gamifying teaching compassion and anti-bullying for children. Like, where do you think is the biggest opportunities in games for like social purposes?
I think more and more people are aware now of concepts like emotional intelligence, social and emotional learning, mindfulness, etc. And there's more people practicing that toolkit, and just being aware of your feelings, knowing how to remain calm in a stressful situation, knowing how to make sure that your emotions aren't getting the better of you while you're trying to make an important decision or decide what to say. These are all useful skills to have, but there's a difference between wisdom and what happens with emotional intelligence. If I tell you that 2 + 2 is 4, you're going to remember that for the rest of your life. That's wisdom. But if I explain how to be aware of your emotions, that's a practice. It's not going to work like wisdom. You're going to have maintain a conscious awareness and practice the tool to maintain that. It's a little like being in the air traffic control tower of your brain, having a sense of everything that's going on and actively and consciously managing it instead of allowing your ego and your feelings to hijack you. So this is something there's going to be studies around the world where learn about these concepts and are going to realize the benefit, and more schools will. There will be more good software products that help about it, and it's just steadily getting better. And I think for at least for right now, we need some protection in how big tech companies and big social platforms are being manipulated. And I basically feel like the motive of these big around allowing allowing advertising that's just simply not truthful or that's really offensive or misleading. I think there ought to be more regulation of that. And to me, it's really sad when an industry doesn't recognize that it needs to police itself, because if you to wait for the government to do it, shame on you.
Yes. Then maybe perhaps a little bit on more as you have recently moved towards, like you said, you want to impact more people and do coaching and advisory roles, and to my understanding, you are open to some more of such activities in your current chapter in life. So let's discuss a little bit more on that part also. Like, we have a lot of investors here in the audience also. So when you're giving investors expert advice on technology or perhaps on investing in gaming companies, what kind of things do you look at from the investor's perspective?
Yeah, well, I think my main business activity now is I work with technology companies that have innovative leaders, and sometimes venture firms will ask me to a company and their leaders. Sometimes they find me on. I come across them on my own, and basically we start a relationship where every month I'm talking to them and just helping them. And of course, I can help with strategy, I can business execution, but I also promise them that this is a kind of a holistic practice where I'm going to help you the best version of themselves that's possible. And I'm going to help them avoid making all the mistakes that I did. And you know, I think for anybody running any kind of a technology business that's facing a critical issue, I've probably been in the situation many times. I've probably seen the bad, the ugly. I've done it right. I've done it wrong. I've seen a lot of the things that can go wrong. I know Murphy's Law really well. So this has turned out to be a really fun thing for me to do to help in this way. And I've been doing it for the last 5 to 10 years. And 3 of my clients have become unicorns. One of them is going public right now. And other clients have managed to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. So I feel really good about the people I've been able to help and the portfolio of companies that are doing well because I was help them.
And then, of course, when you're advising these businesses, smaller, which are on the growth path, on their strategy or products or operation or culture, like, is there like where do you start when you like sit down, let's sit down for the very first meeting, like what's your number one task or action to do?
Well, there's a professor at Stanford, her name is Carol Dweck, spelled D-W-E-C-K, and she came up with this model that she tested and validated, which is that people tend a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. These terms are pretty self-explanatory. If you think about it, you realize that you know both types of people. Mm-hmm. And I think right up in the beginning, it's very difficult for me to engage with a leader in a company if they don't have a growth mindset. They have to be willing to go on that journey. They have to be willing to basically become a little bit more vulnerable to want to explore and learn more about where they might be able to improve. Where there's opportunities, where there are blind spots that maybe they can work on or do a better job of protecting themselves from. And, you know, I'm pretty fearless about talking to people about what I think they need to hear about. I occasionally find myself saying to a client, well, I don't want to be the messenger that's going to get shot, but and then I'll tell them what they need to hear, you know. Mm-hmm. And it is true. I still run into plenty of people that where their ego just can't tolerate the idea that they need any help. You know, their belief system is that I'm a fully grown adult. I've got this all figured out. It would be embarrassing if I had to have a mentor or a life coach. And I don't call myself those things, but if that's the way they see it, it's too threatening to their ego. And that to me is a reflection of somebody that maybe has a fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm. Then if you go like really deep into management training, like high performance leadership, what kind of methods do you like to use to train the leaders?
Well, I think there's a lot of things about business, about management, about technology, about customers that can be taught. That's the good news. That, you know, it's possible to learn them in school or learn them on the job, but there are some areas where there have been extensive studies. They're called twin studies, where they take identical twins that were given up for adoption. Mm-hmm. And grew up in completely different families, not even knowing they had a twin, but they're genetically identical. And they've been able to analyze, how did these people turn out? What did they study? What did they choose to do? You know, what kind of traits do they have? And they've been able to determine, you know, if you have a bunch of identical twins that are all deciding to be nuclear physicists or brain surgeons or professional athletes in the same sport, without ever knowing about each other, that clearly there's perhaps an underlying genetic thing there. You know, for example, if you want to play a National Basketball Association, every single inch in height doubles your chances of playing in the NBA. So even if you're 6'11", you're twice as well off if you're 7 feet, get one more inch. So these it all up. And these studies have found that things like leadership and strategy and creativity, artistry, math skills, engineering that's a short list of some of the things where your genetic do in fact give you a boost and make it easier for you to learn or apply it, have give you a boost somewhere else. But again, the good news, all kinds of stuff that we can all learn and get better at. And you know, if there are areas where we feel like, yeah, I don't really enjoy doing that, and I'm not so good at that, that doesn't come to me naturally. Yeah, other people to do.
Okay, cool. Then of course, forming these radical strategies is deep inside your DNA. Now with the coronavirus disrupting the operation of so many companies, what's your advice to how to align the strategy with the current environment?
I actually think there were some major changes before the pandemic that are being validated by the pandemic. I mean, we have almost 8 billion people. Half of them are introverts. We introverts, we like being at home. We like having an anonymous identity when we're wading into a social situation. If you think about it, the extroverts, and I have plenty of friends and members that are extroverts, and I admire and appreciate extroverts. God bless you, extroverts. My wife is an extrovert. I'm very glad she is. And I'll just say that the extroverts maybe are more willing to have a luxury branded car, nice clothing, a great hairstyle, and jewelry, and go to bars and clubs, meet people. I'm not as comfortable doing any of those things. And I think most of my fellow introverts are happy to carve out their social identity and the meaning of their and purpose of their lives through what they're doing in their digital social worlds. And that's very exciting. What that tells you is that there's a lot of digital natives growing up now. And as they grow up, they're realizing, wow, I love playing games, and I'm gonna spend my life playing games. And there's certain kind of games that I like, and they're going to do part because of the social value in doing it, because it's and having social status. And so the industry revenue is going to keep growing as we find more ways for people to feel like it, to do what the extroverts do, but do it with digital goods. You know, the company I'm working with now called that's based in Kiev, Ukraine, and they're an independent third-party marketplace for virtual goods trading from games like Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, also known as CS:GO. So the skins, you know, the outfits you wear in games like that, you can go to D-Market and trade them. And I think that's an example of what's coming. You know, there's more and more activity just around the cost. In fact, some people are starting to call it social commerce, not e-commerce, social commerce. Transactions and buying things, all we're in kind of a social setting. And I think that's going to become a really big deal.
Okay, cool. You know, I have only one more question left, and that's like, is there one question you'd like to ask me that I didn't ask from you?
It's been a pretty good chat. I really can't think of anything obvious that's been left out. Sometimes people ask me, what game am I playing? The game that I enjoy the most actually is a card game, Magic the Gathering. I play that with my, I have 4 children. My youngest is a 16-year-old son, and he and I love to play that game. Crash is pretty epic.
Okay, Trip, thank you so much for being here with us, and definitely next summer, rain check, COVID check in Helsinki, Finland, and thank you so much.
Fabulous. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank
God
you.
bless.